Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening, and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. As I've noted several times since the election of President Donald Trump, the real battle for America now begins in earnest. Over the last few years, the enemies of traditional America have controlled so many of the nation's institutions that their onslaught has been subtle, unreported, and unstoppable. But now that their complete transformation of America has been at least partially derailed and have a singular enemy standing in their path, I believe we will see them and their plans exposed dramatically. It's an insidious force that I have warned you about for decades. In the 1960s, I worked with students at Berkeley and other campuses. I saw radicalism up close. The counterculture of that era succeeded more fully than anyone dared to think possible. On campus, in the media, and in much of government, the counterculture of the 1960s has become today's establishment. So why are they still so angry? Every protester, every person screaming down a congressman at a town hall meeting has his or her own reasons. But at the top of the food chain, globalist elites are running the show. And right now, they're extremely frustrated. With all their success, things still are not the way they want them. To their irritation, America remains the greatest nation in the world. 9 out of 10 Americans still believe in God. 77% of Americans still believe in angels. The elite see globalism as the only way to fix the world's problems. This is exactly what the prophets predicted for these days and why I have spent so much effort warning about the danger of global governance. But Americans don't like what they see in globalism. Only 37% of Americans believe that the United Nations is doing a good job solving problems. Globalist elites thought they had found a backdoor to world government by using multinational trade deals like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. The organizations necessary to administer such huge agreements would become super governments to which each trade partner must cede sovereignty. But the United States elected a new president who wants to focus on trade agreements with individual nations, not groups of nations. That way, there's no need for a new set of international laws, a new super bureaucracy to carry out those laws, or new multinational courts to punish dissenters. More than anything else, this is why the global elites are throwing everything they've got at the new administration in Washington. It delays the building of the apparatus the Antichrist will later need to govern the world. In the process, they've induced bizarre behavior among their minions. There are people pulling their kids from public schools because they have been convinced that they should fear the new Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. Their big concern with her is that she advocates school choice. She wants all parents, including poor ones, to have a choice in the education of their children. Soon after she was confirmed as secretary, liberal activists physically prevented DeVos from entering a middle school she intended to visit. The Washington Post said the protesters came at her, forcing her to retreat into a government vehicle as a man shouted, "Shame." She eventually entered through a different door, but this was yet another example of violence being used by those protesting the new administration. Republican members of Congress, as well as some Democrats, have been facing wild-eyed hostility at town hall meetings. Some even had to be canceled due to safety concerns. In 2002, Howard Rheingold wrote a book called Smart Mobs, The Next Social Revolution. In the fast-moving field of technology, a 15-year-old book might as well be from the Middle Ages. But this one remains relevant because it so perfectly predicted the trends that followed. With only a list of phone numbers of available agitators, you can send out a single text and summon an instant crowd. Text and social media have become the manufacturers of mobs. And because the same crowd can show up in a variety of places, a few hundred people can look like thousands. Maybe Rheingold could have called his book Smartphone Mobs. The groups who staged the women's marches on January 21st are now planning a new general strike. They are calling it A Day Without a Woman. It is scheduled for March 8th. They want women to take the day off from paid and unpaid labor. The women's strike was announced in a manifesto written by 6 organizers for The Guardian of London. Several of their pronouncements were against so-called neoliberals. Google's dictionary defines neoliberal as relating to a modified form of liberalism tending to favor free market capitalism. Of course, free market capitalism is simply a redundant way of saying capitalism. By this definition, Bill Clinton would have been considered a neoliberal because he believed it took free markets to build prosperity. The same for Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and John Kennedy. But for a new generation of liberals, you're either a socialist or you're evil. Some of those behind the strike and manifesto have a history of violent extremism. One of the authors is Razmia Youssef O'Day. She is a convicted terrorist. A New York Post opinion piece by Kyle Smith said, O'Day, Palestinian, was convicted in Israel in 1970 for her part in 2 terrorist bombings, one of which killed 2 students while they were shopping for groceries. She spent 10 years in prison for her crimes. She then managed to become a U.S. citizen in 2004 by lying about her past, but was subsequently convicted in 2014 of immigration fraud for the falsehoods. However, she won the right to a new trial set for this spring by claiming she had been suffering from PTSD at the time she lied on her application. Another of the co-authors is Angela Davis. Remember her? She was a prominent leader of the Communist Party USA in the 60s. She had close ties with the Black Panthers. In 1970, Davis bought the guns that were used in the armed takeover of the California courtroom. One juror was injured, and the prosecutor left paralyzed for life. The judge, Harold Haley, was killed. Angela Davis went underground, and the FBI put her on their 10 most wanted fugitive lists. With a clever defense funded by the Communist Party and public pressure of worldwide Free Angela campaign, she was acquitted despite the mountain of evidence against her. Another manifesto, author Titi Bhattacharya, praises the modern followers of the man who murdered more people than anyone in history, Chairman Mao. The New York Times said both Hitler and Stalin were outdone by Mao Zedong. From 1958 to 1962, His great leap forward policy led to the death of up to 45 million people, easily making it the biggest episode of mass murder ever recorded. But writing for the International Socialist Review, Bhattacharya excitedly pronounced that the Maoists are back in the news, and by all accounts, they are fighting against all the right people. An article in The Nation said, according to FBI statistics, the United States experienced more than 2,500 domestic bombings in just 18 months in 1971 and 1972, with virtually no solved crimes and barely any significant prosecutions. Why is the new feminist movement recycling terrorists from that period? I'm not sure. Maybe it's because the old rage has returned, or never left. Only this time, it's more widespread. It has an even greater potential for harm, and its weapons are far more lethal than mere bombs and guns. It now threatens an entire civilization. In the last few weeks, a number of Jewish community centers have received bomb threats. As of the time I record this program, there have been no actual bombs, but it's still a big deal. The threats have caused evacuations. They have required a huge police and firefighter response at locations where children are commonly present. President Donald Trump denounced these threats. He said, the anti-Semitic threats targeting our Jewish community and community centers are horrible and are painful and a very sad reminder of the work that still must be done to root out hate and prejudice and evil. But his critics have said that his denunciation was not strong enough. Not surprising. On the other hand, last week, America's Democrats almost selected a known anti-Semite as their next party chairman. It took 2 ballots, and Representative Keith Ellison of Minnesota still just barely lost. Ellison is the first Muslim ever elected to Congress. He has a long history of anti-Semitism. For 10 years, he was a member of the anti-Semitic group Nation of Islam, led by the notorious hate-monger Louis Farrakhan. In 1995, Ellison wrote, Minister Farrakhan is a role model for black youth. Among a host of other things, Farrakhan called Judaism a gutter religion. He called the creation of Israel an outlaw act. Ellison also defended Black Panther Stokely Carmichael, who died in 1998. Carmichael flatly claimed Zionism must be destroyed. At the University of Minnesota in 1990, Carmichael said Zionists joined with the Nazis in murdering Jews so that they would flee to Palestine. At the time, University President Niels Hasselmo said he personally found the statements in Carmichael's speech concerning alleged Zionist collaboration with the Nazis deeply offensive. But Ellison defended Carmichael. He wrote, the university position appears to be this: political Zionism is off limits no matter what dubious circumstances Israel was founded under, no matter what the Zionists do to the Palestinians, and no matter what wicked regimes Israel allies itself with. Sarah Jane Olson is one of the surviving members of the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA. That's the terrorist organization that kidnapped and tortured Patty Hearst, robbed banks, and murdered several people. Also known as Kathleen Celaya, Olson participated in a robbery where the terrorist murdered a mother of 4 who was at the bank to make a deposit for her church. By helping to make bombs for the SLA, Olson also contributed to the attempted murder of several police officers and others. Before going to trial, she fled and went underground. Under her new name, she lived a seemingly ordinary life for many years. When she was recaptured in 1999, those on the far left fringe raised money for her defense. At one of those events, Keith Ellison publicly defended her. He said, "I'm a supporter of anybody who's subject to political prosecution based on their being in a vilified group." It seems he is also a fan of another 1970s-era urban guerrilla, Assata Shakur. Shakur is a convicted cop killer for the Black Liberation Army. She escaped from prison in 1979 and fled to Cuba. Ellison called her good and decent. He said, "I'm praying that Castro does not get to the point where he has to really barter with these guys over here," meaning Americans, because they're going to get Assata Shakur. Ellison defended the cop killer, made Castro a hero, but didn't say a word about the good and decent Cubans murdered or in prison for speaking out against Castro's oppressive regime. In 2009, Ellison was the featured speaker at a fundraiser for a Virginia politician, Issam Omesh. Ellison was full of praise for Omesh, who had been kicked off the Virginia Commission on Immigration when it became known that he supports jihad in Palestine. Omesh told a group of Muslims, "We, the Muslims of the Washington metropolitan area, are here today to tell our brothers and sisters in Palestine that you have learned the way, that you have known the jihad way is the way to liberate your land." These are the kinds of people Ellison has long associated with and defended. Ellison was endorsed for the party chairmanship by heavyweight senators Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Chuck Schumer. But Ellison lost to President Obama's choice, former Labor Secretary Tom Perez. So why am I concerned about Ellison since he did not win the Democratic National Committee chairmanship? After the tally had been announced, angry Ellison supporters stormed out of the room chanting, "No big money, party for the people." Minutes later, the new chairman asked Ellison to be the party's deputy chairman. That means that Keith Ellison, the known anti-Semite and supporter of Islamic causes, is next in line to lead the nation's Democrats.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470-470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.
Last week, I mentioned the New Jerusalem. It is a fascinating topic that I know a lot of you have questions about. So, let's take a brief look at the magnificent city whose builder and maker is God. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 2, John said, "And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband." Some Bible interpreters believe that this city has existed from the time Jesus left the earth to go to prepare a place for his bride, the church. If that's so, this city exists during our present age, although it is invisible. It may be that the holy city will be suspended above the earth during the 1,000-year kingdom, and that the immortal believers will principally live there. This would help to explain the questions of how mortal and immortal beings can live together in the millennium. Since the mortals are those believers who live through the tribulation, will continue to marry, have children, and live ordinary lives. This, of course, won't be true of the immortal believers. These saints will already have received their resurrection bodies. After the millennium and the recreation of the earth, the city will apparently descend to the new earth and actually rest on it. The New Jerusalem will have 12 gates through which the peoples of the nations will go in and out of the city. In any case, this city made by God will be the center of the universe. Light will emanate from it, and all life in the universe will revolve around it. John pictures the city as a new bride adorned for her husband. Because of the term bride, some interpreters feel that only the bride of Christ, the church, will live in this city. However, we know that Abraham was promised a city. The writer of the book of Hebrews says, "For he looked for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. But now they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city." There can be no question that this promised city is the New Jerusalem. While it may be the bride's city, it will also have other permanent inhabitants. The saved of the house of Israel. The foundation stones of the city will have the 12 apostles' names on them, while the 12 gates are named for 12 tribes of Israel. These 24 spiritual leaders represent the two main groups who will inhabit the city, symbolizing the foundation and access to the New Jerusalem. A third group of people will also have access to the city, even though their principal place of residence will be the new earth. This group is called the nations, which means peoples or Gentiles. They will be comprised of believers who didn't happen to be a part of Israel in the Old Testament or of the church in the New Testament. Noah would be one of these, since he was not an Israelite. Naaman the leper would also be in this group, since he wasn't a Jew either. Many other Old Testament people knew God, believed in him, and found salvation, but were never part of Israel. All the Gentiles who are saved during the tribulation will also be in this company of believers. Most important thing about this new city and new earth is that God will be there in person. We will see him face to face. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12 says, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face." 1 John chapter 3, verse 2 says, "Beloved, now we are the children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." Jesus' glorified human body is the tabernacle of God, which Revelation 21, verse 3 says, has come among men. He will have his glorified body for all eternity, and we will have ours. That means face-to-face fellowship will be no problem. No matter where you are in life, no matter what you've done, you have an opportunity right now to be one of the ones who will someday see him as he is, face to face. And here's the miracle. At that moment, you will feel the greatest awe and wonder, but not a smidging of shame. That can only happen because Christ died on the cross for you. And you can enter into that right now. Just formally ask Jesus Christ to come into your heart and to forgive you for all your sins through his shed blood on your behalf. Right now, ask him to come in and forgive you for all your sins and make your home heaven right now. Well, folks, that's it for tonight. God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.